Commander Vrak of the Sauron Empire had seen countless planets, fought in endless wars, and led his people through brutal victories. As a veteran warrior, he had come to expect certain things from new species: primitive tactics, disorganized combat, and above all, a predictable reliance on outdated forms of warfare. Earth, as far as he knew, would be no different. That was what the reports had said. Humans were resourceful, perhaps, but ultimately inferior. Vrak held these thoughts firmly as his transport ship landed on Earth, the small blue planet now a member of the Galactic Alliance. Vrak's delegation, a mixture of Sauron warriors and other alien officials from the Alliance, stepped out into the bright sunlight of Earth's capital. They were here for one reason: to observe the Human Military Academy, a place that boasted its role in shaping Earth's best soldiers. It was a formality, of course. The humans were eager to show off their military might to the wider galaxy, but Vrak wasn't interested in being impressed. As the group was led toward the academy by a human officer, Vrak scanned the area with cold indifference. He couldn't help but feel a sense of superiority. After all, the Sauron Empire had fought for eons, perfecting the art of war to a degree unmatched by any species in the known galaxy. How could a relatively young species like humans have anything to offer? His eyes moved across the rows of human cadets training in the academy grounds. There was a sense of discipline among them, certainly, but nothing he hadn't seen before. They performed drills, sharpened their skills, and marched in formation like soldiers from any other world. Vrak's gaze narrowed, unimpressed. This would be another tedious diplomatic show, no doubt filled with predictable displays of strength and scripted speeches about unity. The tour officially began with a presentation on Earth's military history. Vrak and the others were guided into a large, darkened room where holographic displays flickered to life, depicting scenes of human warfare across millennia. The images started with ancient conflicts, tribal skirmishes, primitive weapons, and early forms of strategy that were crude compared to the advanced tactics Vrak had studied throughout his life. It was all rather elementary. But as the presentation progressed, something changed. The history of Earth's conflicts grew increasingly complex. The holograms showed the rise of organized armies, then the devastation of the world wars, massive, globe-spanning conflicts that ravaged human civilization. Vrak found himself growing slightly more interested. The sheer scale of destruction humans had inflicted upon themselves was notable. Few species could endure such losses and come back stronger. Still, it wasn't until the presentation reached the 20th and 21st centuries that Vrak began to feel something he hadn't expected: unease. The narrator spoke of guerrilla warfare, tactics designed to wear down stronger foes over time through hit-and-run attacks, sabotage, and psychological warfare. The holograms displayed scenes of small human forces ambushing much larger armies, using the terrain, stealth, and deception to their advantage. Vrak shifted in his seat, frowning. This was not the honor-bound combat he was accustomed to. The Sauron Empire's methods were direct, their victories won through overwhelming force and superior strategy. But humans? They fought like cornered animals, unpredictable and willing to sacrifice anything for survival. It was chaotic, but undeniably effective. Next came the Cold War, a period of human history where no open battles were fought, yet nations teetered on the edge of mutual destruction for decades. Vrak listened intently as the narrator explained the concept of psychological warfare, the art of breaking an enemy without ever firing a shot. Propaganda, misinformation, and diplomacy were used as weapons just as lethal as any bomb. It was a kind of warfare Vrak had rarely encountered in his campaigns, where strength was measured by the size of your army or the power of your weapons. But these humans had fought wars of the mind, pushing their enemies to the brink without direct confrontation. And the results were undeniable. Entire regimes had collapsed without a single shot fired. Vrak's earlier disdain was beginning to waver. The final section of the presentation focused on modern warfare, where humans had taken these lessons from their history and applied them in ways that made them a force to be reckoned with. The holograms depicted small teams of special forces infiltrating enemy bases, neutralizing threats with minimal resources, and escaping without detection. Vrak could see the precision and ruthlessness in their tactics, the efficiency of their actions. As the lights in the room came back on, Vrak sat in silence. The other members of the delegation began to discuss the presentation, but Vrak's mind was elsewhere. There was something about the way humans fought, an unpredictability, a willingness to adapt, that he found troubling. They weren't constrained by the same rules of engagement that governed most other species in the galaxy. They fought dirty when they had to, and more than that, they fought to win, no matter the cost. Vrak's eyes narrowed as he stood, following the group to the next part of the tour. His curiosity was piqued now, though he wouldn't admit it. This was only the beginning, and already, Vrak felt a gnawing sense of unease growing in his chest. Humans were not what he had expected. They were something far more dangerous. As the tour continued, Commander Vrak couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the humans' approach to warfare. The next segment focused on a live demonstration of modern human military tactics, with cadets participating in a simulated combat scenario. Vrak's skepticism lingered, but he watched closely, curious to see how this species would handle a real-life situation, even if simulated. The cadets were divided into small teams and tasked with taking down a much larger, technologically superior enemy force. Vrak's initial reaction was one of dismissal. In his experience, larger forces always prevailed. Overwhelming numbers and superior firepower were the Sauron way. But what he witnessed was nothing short of shocking. The human cadets, outnumbered and seemingly outgunned, did not panic. Instead, they moved with a calculated precision that defied their apparent disadvantage. Their tactics were anything but conventional. Vrak observed how the humans used the environment to their advantage, setting traps and using terrain to outmaneuver their enemies. They didn't rush into battle blindly. They set ambushes, struck quickly, and then disappeared before the enemy could respond. These weren't the grand, honorable engagements Vrak was used to. No, the humans fought with a kind of cunning that was entirely foreign to him. Vrak could see the frustration of the simulated enemy as they struggled to deal with the constant hit-and-run tactics. Every time they thought they had the humans pinned down, the cadets would slip away, leaving behind only destruction. It was warfare stripped of honor and replaced with pure pragmatism. The humans didn't fight for glory, they fought to win, no matter the method. For the first time, Vrak felt a deep sense of discomfort. These humans were like predators, stalking their prey with patience and ruthlessness. The simulation reached a critical point when the human cadets, still heavily outnumbered, laid a final trap. They lured the enemy into a narrow pass, where the terrain prevented the larger force from deploying their superior weapons effectively. Then, with surgical precision, the humans unleashed their attack. It wasn't about brute force. It was about striking at the exact moment of weakness, turning the enemy's strength against them. What struck Vrak most was the humans' ability to adapt. They didn't follow a strict, preordained strategy. They reacted to the situation in real time, making adjustments as the battle unfolded. This was not something Vrak had encountered often in his military career. The Sauron Empire, like many other advanced species, valued rigid discipline and strict adherence to battle plans. Deviating from the plan was seen as a weakness. But the humans thrived in chaos. They embraced it, used it to their advantage, and turned unpredictability into their greatest weapon. As the simulated battle concluded with a decisive human victory, Vrak stood in stunned silence. He had seen tactical brilliance before, but never like this. The humans weren't just soldiers, they were survivors. They didn't rely on superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They relied on their ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast their enemies. And they were frighteningly good at it. Vrak's mind raced as the demonstration ended. He had underestimated these humans. Their approach to warfare was unlike anything he had encountered in his long military career. They were dangerous, not because of their strength, but because of their adaptability and their willingness to use any means necessary to achieve victory. But the most unsettling part for Vrak wasn't just their tactics. It was their mindset. The humans didn't seem to care about the traditional concepts of honor and glory in battle. They were focused solely on winning, on survival, on ensuring that their enemies could never defeat them. In a galaxy where most species valued some form of honor in combat, the humans stood out as ruthless pragmatists, willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goals. As Vrock followed the group to the next part of the tour, he couldn't help but wonder, what kind of enemy would the humans be if they were ever truly threatened? If they could fight like this in a simulation, what would they do in a real war, with their backs against the wall? He wasn't sure he wanted to find out. For the first time in his life, Commander Vrock felt a flicker of fear. Not for himself, but for his empire. He had always believed that the Sauron were the pinnacle of military strength in the galaxy. But now, after witnessing the humans in action, he wasn't so sure. There was something about them, something unsettlingly efficient and cold in their approach to warfare, that made him question everything he had been taught about the art of combat. The human officer leading the tour smiled politely as they moved on, seemingly unaware of the storm of thoughts raging in Vrock's mind. The other delegates chatted quietly amongst themselves, but Vrock remained silent. He was still processing what he had seen, trying to make sense of it. The humans weren't just another species with a different way of fighting. They were something entirely different, something that couldn't be measured by traditional military standards. As they approached the next part of the academy, Vrock's mind continued to race. The humans had shown him a side of warfare that he had never considered. Their adaptability, their willingness to fight dirty, and their relentless drive to survive made them more dangerous than any species he had encountered. He had come to Earth expecting to see an inferior race playing at war. But what he had seen was something far more terrifying. The Sauron Empire prided itself on its strength, on its discipline, on its honor. But now, Vrock wasn't so sure those qualities would be enough if they ever faced humanity on the battlefield. The humans didn't fight for honor or glory. They fought to win, no matter the cost. And that, Vrock realized, was what made them truly dangerous. The next part of the tour was what the human officers called the War Games, a full-scale simulation meant to test the limits of the Academy's best cadets. Vrock had seen enough at this point to know that underestimating humans was a mistake, but he still harbored some doubts. Simulations, while impressive, were not reality. The real test of any soldier was how they performed under the pressure of true combat, and no simulation could fully replicate that. As the War Games began, Vrock's attention was drawn to the setup. The human cadets were vastly outnumbered, tasked with defending a strategically important area against a simulated alien invasion force. The odds were deliberately stacked against them. The enemy force had superior numbers, advanced weaponry, and aerial support. In almost every conceivable way, the humans were outmatched. But instead of the panic Vrock expected, the human cadets were methodical, calm even. They didn't rush into defensive positions or try to fight the enemy head-on. Instead, they dispersed, laying traps and setting up ambush points, clearly preparing for a long, drawn-out battle. Vrock's unease deepened as he watched their preparations unfold. There was no desperation in their movements, no sense of impending defeat. If anything, they seemed completely at ease with the idea that they would be fighting a vastly superior force. The alien enemy arrived in full force, overwhelming the human positions immediately. Any other species would have fallen back, attempted to regroup, or launched a counteroffensive in an effort to slow the advance. But not the humans. They didn't react in any of the predictable ways Vrock had come to expect. Instead, they simply vanished, retreating into the shadows of the environment, leaving the enemy force confused and unsure of where to strike next. What followed was a lesson in patience and precision. The human cadets didn't attack en masse. They struck in small, targeted assaults, hitting supply lines, cutting off communication, and ambushing isolated groups of the enemy before disappearing again into the landscape. It was the same kind of guerrilla warfare Vrock had seen earlier in the simulations, but this time, it was on a much larger scale. The alien enemy had the numbers and firepower, but it didn't matter. The humans were fighting a war of attrition, wearing their opponents down piece by piece, exploiting every mistake, every gap in their defenses. Vrock's mind raced as he tried to understand what he was seeing. The human strategy wasn't one of brute force or direct confrontation. It was one of manipulation, designed to frustrate and disorient the enemy until they became careless. The humans weren't trying to win the battle in a single strike. They were playing a long game, one that required incredible patience and discipline. And it was working. The alien force began to splinter, their superior numbers meaning little as they were picked apart, one unit at a time. The turning point came when the human cadets executed a maneuver that left Vrak in stunned silence. With half their forces deliberately exposed to the enemy, the humans had set a trap that lured the bulk of the alien army into a narrow valley. It was a calculated risk, one that required them to sacrifice a significant portion of their own forces in the process. Vrak couldn't believe it. He had never seen a species willingly allow such a loss, all for the sake of a greater victory. It went against everything the Sauron Empire stood for, where every soldier's life was valued and protected. But the humans were different. They had made peace with the idea that victory sometimes required sacrifice, and they had planned accordingly. As the alien army marched into the valley, confident in their advantage, the trap was sprung. The humans collapsed the surrounding terrain, trapping the enemy within a kill zone where their superior numbers and technology meant nothing. In the chaos that followed, the humans launched a devastating counterattack, taking full advantage of the disoriented and disorganized enemy. Within minutes, the larger alien force was in full retreat, their numbers decimated by the human cadets' ruthlessness and precision. Vrak was speechless. The battle had been over before it even truly began. The humans had won not through brute force or superior technology, but through their willingness to embrace sacrifice, to fight in ways that no other species would even consider. Their victory was the result of their ability to think beyond conventional tactics, to use the environment and their enemies' strengths against them. As the war games concluded, Vrak felt a cold realization settle over him. This wasn't just a display of military tactics. It was a demonstration of how far humans were willing to go to ensure victory. They didn't care about the rules of war or the concepts of honor that other species held so dear. They cared only about survival, about winning, no matter the cost. And in that, they were more dangerous than any species Vrak had ever encountered. The human cadets, now victorious, regrouped with the same calm efficiency they had displayed throughout the simulation. There was no celebration, no reveling in their victory. To them, this was simply what needed to be done. They had completed their mission, and that was enough. Vrak's thoughts swirled as he followed the delegation out of the simulation area. He had always believed that the Sauron Empire was the pinnacle of military strength, that no species could rival their power and discipline. But after witnessing the humans in action, he wasn't so sure anymore. The humans had shown him something he had never expected, the willingness to do whatever it took to win, to sacrifice anything and everything in the pursuit of victory. For the first time in his life, Vrak felt fear, not for himself, but for his people. If the humans ever turned their attention to the Sauron Empire, Vrak wasn't sure they could withstand the kind of warfare he had just witnessed. The humans didn't fight for glory or honor. They fought to survive, and in their relentless drive to win, they had become something far more dangerous than any other species in the galaxy. As he walked in silence, Vrak realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their soldiers. It was their unyielding spirit, their ability to adapt, to sacrifice, and to fight without mercy or hesitation. And that, more than anything else, made them a threat that could not be ignored. As the tour drew to a close, Commander Vrak's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. What he had seen wasn't just impressive, it was unsettling on a fundamental level. The humans were not the species he had expected. Their entire approach to warfare was unlike anything he had encountered in his long military career. They were a contradiction, brutal yet strategic, chaotic yet precise. And now, as they walked toward their final debriefing, Vrak couldn't shake the unease growing in his chest. The human officer leading the delegation offered polite farewells as the official portion of the visit concluded. The other alien dignitaries murmured in agreement, nodding with the kind of diplomatic approval expected of such tours. But Vrak remained silent, his thoughts swirling with the implications of what he had witnessed. The humans were far more dangerous than the reports had indicated, and Vrak wasn't sure how to process that. As they moved away from the academy grounds, Vrak turned to his fellow Sauron officers. They were discussing the day's events with a detached interest, as if the tour had been nothing more than a mildly intriguing diversion. But Vrock couldn't help but interrupt. "Did you not see it?" Vrock asked, his voice low but urgent. His comrades looked at him, confused. "See what?" one of them replied. "It was an impressive display, yes, but nothing we couldn't handle." Vrock stared at them, his frustration mounting. How could they not understand? "They don't fight like us. They don't fight like anyone. They use everything, every weakness, every strength. They don't care about honor or glory. They care about one thing, survival. And that makes them unpredictable, dangerous." His fellow officers exchanged glances, but none seemed to grasp the gravity of Vrock's words. To them, the Sauron way was the pinnacle of military prowess, and nothing they had seen today had convinced them otherwise. But Vrock knew better. The humans had shown him something far more terrifying than advanced technology or overwhelming force. They had shown him what it meant to truly fight without limits, without rules. Vrock fell silent as the transport back to their ship arrived. He boarded without another word, lost in thought. As the shuttle ascended, leaving Earth behind, Vrock couldn't help but replay the events of the day in his mind. The humans had shattered his preconceptions, forced him to question everything he knew about warfare. They had demonstrated a level of adaptability and ruthlessness that was both awe-inspiring and deeply disturbing. He thought back to the war games, to the moment when the human cadets had lured their enemy into a trap, sacrificing their own forces without hesitation. That level of calculated sacrifice was something the Sauron Empire would never embrace. In the Sauron military, every soldier was a valuable asset, their lives not to be wasted. But to the humans, it seemed that nothing was off-limits. They would sacrifice anything, even themselves, if it meant securing victory. And it wasn't just the tactics that disturbed Vrock. It was the mindset behind them. The humans didn't view warfare as a noble endeavor, as a test of strength and honor. They viewed it as a means to an end, a tool for survival. To them, there were no rules, no limitations. They would do whatever was necessary to win, no matter how brutal or unconventional. Vrock had always prided himself on his ability to understand his enemies, to predict their movements and strategies. But after today, he realized that understanding humans was impossible. They were too adaptable, too unpredictable. They didn't fight by the rules that govern most species. They fought on their own terms, and that made them a threat that couldn't be easily countered. As the shuttle docked with the Sauron flagship, Vrock disembarked and made his way to his private quarters. The weight of the day's events hung heavy on his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he felt something he had never expected to feel about another species: fear. He had seen countless battles, faced down enemies far more powerful than humans. But none had left him with this gnawing sense of dread. The humans were different. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to survive, and that made them more dangerous than any species Vrock had ever encountered. Sitting in his quarters, Vrock replayed the war games in his mind, the calm efficiency with which the humans had dismantled their enemies. He had expected a species bound by their limitations, constrained by their lack of advanced technology or numbers. But what he had found was a species unbound by the rules of war, unafraid to push the limits of what was acceptable. The Sauron Empire, for all its strength and discipline, had a code, a set of values that governed their conduct in battle. But humans had no such code. They operated outside the bounds of honor and tradition, and that made them impossible to predict. Impossible to defeat in the ways Vrock was used to. The more he thought about it, the more Vrock realized that the humans were not just another player in the galactic power struggle. They were a wildcard, a force that could not be easily measured or understood. And that was what made them truly terrifying. Vrock had always believed that victory came from strength, from discipline, from adhering to a code of conduct that ensured order in the chaos of war. But the humans had shown him a different path, one where chaos was embraced, where victory came not from superior numbers or technology, but from sheer will and adaptability. Vrock couldn't help but wonder what would happen if the humans ever turned their attention to the Sauron Empire. Could his people withstand the kind of warfare the humans practiced? Could they adapt to a conflict where the rules no longer applied, where the enemy was willing to sacrifice anything and everything for victory? He wasn't sure, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. As he sat in the dim light of his quarters, Vrock came to a sobering conclusion. The humans were a threat unlike any he had ever faced. Not because of their weapons or their technology, but because of their spirit. Their relentless, unyielding drive to survive, to win at any cost. And if the Sauron Empire ever found itself at war with them, Vrock knew that it would be a fight unlike any they had ever experienced. He closed his eyes, the weight of that realization settling over him like a heavy cloak. The humans had changed him, forced him to see warfare in a new light. And now, as he prepared to return to his duties, Vrock knew that he could never underestimate them again. The humans were survivors. And in a galaxy where survival was often the only thing that mattered, that made them the most dangerous species of all.